Okay, here we are with I Promise I'm Not Lying, the last video for Unit 7B, Thinking in Language. And so when we look at thinking in language, we're going to look at a couple of important elements. The first being Benjamin Whorf's theory that language determines the way that we think. In other words, linguistic determinism. This would imply that different languages impose different conceptions of reality. And so, based on the language that you think in, um, it's going to affect what you view, or how, I guess, you view reality. And so, language shapes a person's ideas. Many research studies of bilingual individuals report these individuals feeling different senses of selves dependent upon which language they are speaking. Um, and so, Whorf, reality or our conceptions of reality being shaped by the language that we think in. Um, Being, young student, during my undergrad work, I was doing some research on existentialism, and I'll never forget a philosophy professor telling me that to truly understand Jean-Paul Sartre's work, his existential plays and his writings, that I would have to read them in French and understand them in French because there were just so many words and concepts that didn't have English equivalents, and that these subtle nuances of Sartre's writing were being lost on me because I was reading the English translation, which was translating some of the philosophical ideas within the plays and essays too literally. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, more philosophical than perhaps psychological, but that um, our thinking is being influenced by the language we are thinking in. Something else to think about concerning thinking in language is that words equal power, and that the more words that you know, the more well versed you are in a language, the more vocabulary you have to express your thoughts in, um, you know, the better you can think, the more ideas you can generate, or the more ideas that that you can express to the world. And so words definitely hold power, both psychologically and culturally. Thinking affects language, which affects thoughts, right? I'm not going to say that language controls our thinking, but it influences what and how we think. But then in turn, thinking, affects the language, and that, how else are new words formed unless we have the ability to think using the language and then using those thoughts to in turn shape language and further thoughts. And then the last thing that is mentioned here in Unit 7B was thinking in images. We don't always think in terms of language. Sure, we have inner dialogue, uh, but oftentimes when it comes to those procedural or implicit memories, we often visualize what it is we want to do rather than actually expressing it in language. Um, there's been some pretty interesting studies on the power of images concerning thinking. We know from research that watching an activity of a skill that you know can actually activate the brain areas that would be active if you were, doing the activity yourself. That probably has to do with those mirror neurons that we talked about in Unit 3. We also know that mental practice has benefits, and that there's been lots of compelling research concerning athletes and visualization of processes. Anything from, running a cross country race to um, envisioning free throw shots under various conditions, we've seen improvement in people's performance as a result of this sort of mental practice. And visualization, there's been research that it can help in academics too, in that individuals who tend to visualize themselves studying and reading chapters and going through the process tend to actually start doing those sorts of behaviors sooner than those that procrastinate or don't or put off thinking about a big exam or a big test until the last minute. But the key to the mental practice and the positive visualization is that you need to visualize the process, not just the imagined outcome. So, imagining yourself crossing the finish line doesn't work. You have to envision the process it took to get to the finish line. Envisioning the A on your paper doesn't work as well as envisioning the process that you would need to take in order to get the A on the paper. And so that's just, our final thoughts here in Unit 7B on thinking and language. So, any questions that you may have concerning the Whorf hypothesis or any of this thinking in images and in language, just bring them with you to class. Thanks.